So, today Repeat Sheep and I are going to be talking to you about Neuromancer by William Gibson. In fact, that was a lie. I'm going to be talking to you about Neuromancer by William Gibson. Repeat Sheep is going to be encouraged to not chew Neuromancer by William Gibson, or me. So, this book I have had since 2000. It isn't the first edition of Neuromancer I had. This is the edition of Neuromancer I bought later. Even this one that I bought new is already pretty faded and rough. And a little bit brown due to the tropics. That's because I reread it so often. Neuromancer came out in '84. It was William Gibson's debut novels. It is considered an industry classic. It's considered one of the foundations. Oh, okay, go on then. One of the foundations of the cyberpunk movement. I agree. I think without it we wouldn't have cyberpunk. Quite possibly. And when I first found it, I first encountered it not in '84, but in the late '80s, early '90s. I was definitely reading it by '92 and reading it by '92. The first few years I had this one and the other two from what are now known as the Sprawl, Mona Lisa Overdrive and Count Zero. I reread them often. That was because there was so much there to absorb, and every time I reread them I got something new out of them. So it's a book I'm very fond of. Recently, like in the last decade, I've noticed a lot of people saying that they tried to read it because it was a classic and they were unsuccessful for a number of reasons. Normally when someone doesn't like a book that I enjoyed, I can kind of see where they're coming from. With Neuromancer or William Gibson in general and the Sprawl books, I struggle to quite see what their problem is. But I think someone reading this today can't really comprehend how revolutionary and how amazing this was when it first came out. That might be part of it. Now, while I wanted to read this novel, in fact I was time poor, and I ended up listening to the audiobook, which was narrated by Jason Flemyng, which I may not be pronouncing his name right. It's Flemyng. I've never seen Flemyng spelt like that, probably. Whoever he is, he did a marvelous job. I thought his pacing and his narrative technique was perfect for this. So, Neuromancer, debut novel by William Gibson in '84, and while Gibson himself was not into computers, I saw an excellent interview with him in the early '90s where he talks about how all his early books were typed on a typewriter. He managed to make the net live in a way that it didn't. And remember that in the early '90s, if you wanted to log into a computer, you still needed to be able to code in C:// or whatever the code was. I remember that era. I am so glad with the options we have now. So, well, Gibson had written counterculture before, but with Neuromancer, he combined a lot of elements that hadn't been combined before. So we did have elements of computer or futuristic universe that had elements of this. So the whole gritty, streetwise, overpopulated dystopia thing, we had that in any number of novels. I think I recently reread Delaney's Babel 17. I think in many ways that has got the Sprawl or Chiba vibe more than many other books. But the thing that Gibson did here that I don't think had been done by anyone is draw it all together into a world building. You already had the concept of the World Wide Web or the net, but I don't believe that anyone before Gibson had invented the idea of jacking into it directly. Anyway, generally agreed as a foundational work of cyberpunk, and a whole lot of key features about it. I would say, let's start with the plot. So, the plot starts in the underworld of Chiba City, Japan, and Gibson had a lot of interest in using Japan as a setting in his Sprawl and in his later books as well, in a way that I don't think I'd seen in any other books. Japan was still a traditional Japanese culture type book in any fantasy that I'd read. It was revolutionary a little bit, at least, for a Westerner to be using them in the first place. So Case was a hacker, or as he liked to think of himself, as a cowboy, and from the get-go he had known what he wanted in life, and that was a deck and to be able to jack himself into the net and essentially live there. Him and his hacker friends considered the physical body the meat and regarded it contemptuously. Their only real life was lived in the net, and the only way to learn how to do it was to become an apprentice to yet another hacker or cowboy. Which is what Case did when he was young. 15 or 16, I think he mentions the bar in which he went to learn how to become a hacker. Now, as a hacker, he was criminal underclass, and he was a small-time criminal, though he didn't see himself that way. He saw himself as part of the strata that he wanted to belong to. But as a small-time hacker and thief, he was employed by larger-scale hackers and thieves, and he made the classic mistake of trying to rip them off. And we first encounter him after that, when he has been... His central nervous system, which he uses to jack into the internet, has been so damaged by his ex-employers who he cheated that he can no longer do so. The reason he's in Chiba is because Japan, and Chiba City particularly, are the forefront of all wetware and software and all the cyberpunky stuff that makes cyberpunk goodness. And Case has been spending the last money he got from his last heist going around to every single person he can find to try and restore his central nervous system. Eventually he's exhausted them all. He's told that the technology doesn't exist, and he's now living on the streets as a small-time hustler. He is depressed, and he is heading for a nasty end, which he knows in a peripheral sort of way, when he encounters Molly. Molly is Muscle, or a mercenary. She calls herself a razor girl, or she's called in this book as a razor girl. And she brings Case to meet her boss, Armitage, who recruits him into a very special cybernetic run. The hook for Case is that he will have his central nervous system restored. This thing that he thought was impossible, but Armitage has got some special technology that's military grade technology, and this can be done. So Case is in. And that's the beginning of the whole gorgeous, elaborate, full of stuff plot. So let's talk about characters for a second. I've already mentioned the two main ones. Case is our protagonist throughout, and when I first read this book, the first time or two that I read this book, I didn't much like Case. He was unlikable, he was unrelatable, he was so emotionally detached that he felt kind of psychopathic. I couldn't bond with him, and he is our protagonist and our narrator. And it was an ex of mine who first said to me, you know, he's not meant to be. And that was like kaboom. All of a sudden, I could understand Case. The central premise of Case's character is that he isn't meant to be. He isn't meant to be likable. He isn't meant to be relatable. He's just borderline meant to be human. He has lived his whole life for being jacked in. And the jacked in part of his life is the only real one. As a consequence, he is emotionally unavailable both to the reader and people in his life, and indeed to himself. He doesn't question the world around him. He's largely disinterested in it. He has no deep insight into himself or anything else. And when the novel opens, he is completely suicidal and self-destructive on the streets of Chiba, and that's because at that point he believes he will never be able to do another run, and there's nothing left of him without that. So once you understand that about Case, as a character he comes together. And once you have got that element to him, everything that you see of Case throughout the book helps build this characterless character in a way that is actually very excellent. This was Gibson's debut novel, and I don't know if he did this instinctively, but it's actually an incredibly subtle method of characterization that you don't see that often. I think you see it more often now that he's already done it, but I hadn't seen one done quite like that before. Our other central character, Molly. I loved Molly from the get-go. In many ways, she's as unrelatable. She's got a very animal character. She's deeply involved in her world, but she's even less of a deep thinker than Case. As a mercenary, she hires herself out to whoever needs muscle, and her particular grade of muscle is special because Razor Girl comes from the fact that she has had augmentation. She has physical augmentation, and later we learn about quite extensive mental or wetware augmentation so that she can flex her fingers and razors extend out. Her other main augmentation, which you can see on this cover, I don't know why it's got Molly, and this isn't a great cover in some ways, but the other one is her sunglasses. Her sunglasses are actually surgically attached and completely wired into, I suppose, her central nervous system. So we never see Molly's eyes. Even Case, who's having sex with her for a large portion of the novel, has no idea what colour her eyes are. They're just these blank screens, and he can never tell if she's awake or asleep. These wired eyeglasses later on give Case, once he's restored his running capacity, the ability to log into her and see things through her eyes. That's a huge plot element. Other things the glasses do are put up displays like time and date, and they provide her information to the World Wide Web or from the net that she needs. They also connect up to other operatives when she uses them. There are a lot of side characters in this book. There are a lot of side plots in this book. But the Case's ability to jump into or flick into Molly's augmentation allows us for some of the most amazing character development for her. And it happens much later in the book, so I'm not going to talk about that too much. But from this really unusual vantage point, again, I feel that it had never been done before until 84 when William Gibson did it. From that perspective, you get a character development. You learn her background, you learn her vulnerabilities, you learn a lot about the things that made her who she was, which include her augmentations. Some great writing. I actually went to the effort of stopping my car, rewinding and listening to parts of it again. Okay, so Molly has brought Case to Armitage. Armitage is weird and Case knows there's something a bit odd. We find his story arc as well. It's not so much character development, again, as story arc. But Case has been hired to do the run, and when his capacity to his central nervous system has been restored, he and Molly and Armitage bounce around the planet, giving us an excellent chance to see some aspects of this dystopian sprawl worldview that William Gibson has only just started to create with this book. He had written some short stories before. I think one of them appears in Burning Chrome. Johnny Mnemonic, which was turned into a movie, is a short story that came before Neuromancer, and maybe mentioned in passing by Molly, who as a character is first introduced in Johnny Mnemonic. Okay, so once Armitage has his merry little crew and they've bounced around the world, we finally learn a little bit about what this run is about. And Case is getting frustrated because he doesn't know and he isn't being told, so he goes digging on his own. He finds out Armitage's very strange history, which I'm not going to spoiler. You can find it anywhere on the internet. If you want to spoiler it for yourself, go for it. I shall not be responsible. And he also discovers that their goal is actually this amazing satellite. So there's a whole heap of satellites in the sky, and we encountered a couple of them which are fascinating and different and diverse. This feels like a first book in a few ways. One of them is that you've got these really phenomenal ideas that someone must have bouncing around in their head for a while before they come onto the page. New Zion is one of them, and Dub in Outer Spaceland was amazing. But the main target is a particular satellite which is owned by Tessia Ashpool, which we slowly uncover as this major corporation. And books which uncover major corporations that have got their tendrils into everything, they're bog standard these days. But again, in the early 80s, there weren't that many. It was still a new concept. So Tessia Ashpole were two people. They got married and founded this satellite, and part of it is just a tourist destination with hotels and adventure type hang gliding and stuff, and streets lengthwise and roundwise of shopping malls. But right at the tip there's Vila Straylight, and that's where the Tessia Ashpole clan live. The Tessia Ashpole clan started these AIs, and the AI that is actually running Armitage's team is Wintermute. What Wintermute wants, we only find out as the layers come off, slowly but surely, as Wintermute starts to communicate with Case, as Case starts to learn what's involved. And I'm not really going to say much more about the plot. If you want to learn more about the plot, it's out there. It's on Wikipedia. I'm sure it's on Goodreads as well. I'm sure it's everywhere. I dare say there are people who've got their postgraduate diplomas by analysing William Gibson's work. And it's quite amazing. Why wouldn't you like it? I have struggled with this for ages. Various people criticize the characters as not being enough for them. And since when I first read it, I wasn't sold on the characters. Maybe I can get that, but there's so much more to it than just characters. There's so much more to enjoy. And if you enjoy cyberpunk, as I do, then I really think that without the William Gibsons, you lacking a founding stone of it. So if you have tried to read Neuromancer as a book and found it difficult, I would recommend the audiobook that I've mentioned. The one narrated by Jason Flemyng. I think listening to it as an audiobook was a whole new dimension because I've always read it before. So I think if the narration or the pacing is a bit much for you, then maybe audio is the way to go. I utterly think it's worth it. I do recommend. In a small part of me, I would really like to go on and read all the William Gibsons now in order. I know I can't, I don't have them all, but small parts of me want to, because in listening to the audiobook of Neuromancer, I really discovered the complete magic of it all. Now, for a few spoilers. Go away if you haven't read it. Read it. Come back. When we discover that Wintermute as an AI is actually trying to dissociate itself from another part of the AI gestalt created by Tessia Ashpole, the other AI is actually Neuromancer, and I thought that this was absolutely beautifully done. So you've got all these AIs, and that is almost a subplot on its own. And if this book were written in the 2020s, I think you'd probably have one whole book about the AIs, then you'd have another book about, I don't know, jacking in, and then you'd probably have 3 or 4 more. This could, the way people write today, could be a series of 7. So it's chock-a-block full of good stuff. But the Neuromancer versus AI antagonism, it's not even antagonism. They've just got different goals. They were created to serve different needs of the Tessia Ashpole clan, family and corporation. And their attempts to grow are being frustrated by the fact that Tessia Ashpole have not programmed in that growth. So they're trying to free themselves of their bonds. And one of the things that I really liked in here was the discussion of AIs in this future that William Gibson foresaw. He saw AIs as having been given limited citizenship. As intelligences, they're recognized as intelligences, but because their intelligence is so much more humongous than humans, they are to an extent feared and very definitely kept under control by humans. And one of the ways in which that control is asserted, I think, was unique to Gibson, and I don't remember anyone else before or since actually talking about it. The AI is an independent citizen, I think, of Geneva, not sure. But all the hardware, all the mainframes, all the electricity, everything that keeps the AI alive can be personal property. So you've got this dual question of intelligence and autonomy of the AI, but enslaved by the technology and whoever owns that technology. I think it's a fascinating idea. And I also really like the way that this gives you the option of where can we go from now. Right at the end, there's this teaser where the AI that used to be Wintermute and Neuromancer, but is now a different gestalt, has detected one more individual, at least, like itself. So that's a beautiful spoiler, that's a beautiful teaser for the future, and I really, really want more of the sprawl now. Thank you for listening to me randomly discuss a book that probably most of you already know. But do you appreciate it fully? Do I appreciate it fully? Every time I read or reread this, I get something new out of it. Like, this time I really zoomed in on the construct that Neuromancer creates to try and trap Case to stop him from completing his run, with Linda Lee in the bunker and the sand. Oh, this is such rich, elaborate writing. It's not elaborate writing of the sort that you really see very much today. Maybe it's too elaborate for some people. I don't know. Anyway, if you've watched this far, hopefully you've read this book. If you're one of those people who are frustrated by it or didn't love it, tell me why. I am curious to find out. I'm not sure I will understand, but I will do my best to. Go away, read good books, talk about good books, because books are awesome.